all about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclosure Vic homes out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas to get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. Tonight, we are talking about the new push as they slowly glide us into the new Cold War between the United States and Russia. And how it's been done. It's been a very interesting 5 years or so, ever since 2012, when we saw the infamous meeting that fell apart between Putin and Obama. And ever since then, it seems that the tensions between Russia and the United States have been highlighted by the media, and we've had a few different incidents going from then, I would say the more recent, continuing Assange versus the United States, Snowden versus the United States, and Russia's protection of Edward Snowden obviously highlighted one of the bigger events of this new Cold War. And, you know, we had the well-known Cold War in the textbooks that went on from 1947 to 1985. That was a bit different story than the current Cold War that we're viewing. And the current Cold War is between a fascist corporate-dominated government versus a democratic, led by a strong leader, but I would say a democratic system that the Rothschilds do not control. Well, the Rothschilds control the other one. The United States government is controlled by the Rothschilds. The Federal Reserve is controlled by the Rothschilds. So the Federal Reserve controls the government of the United States. So there's a stark contrast between the regimes of the United States and Russia. But the United States government right now, you see this this transition now going into the new president. This Trump now the president of the United States. There seems to be this hysteria about the supposed Russia-Trump connection, that Trump has allegedly worked with Russia, even though that we see, like recently, Trump talks about that the Russian annexation of Crimea must stop, which is not an annexation, but that's in a way the context he referred it to as if it was annexation, rather it was rather the people voting for them to become part of Russia. 96.6% of the people of Crimea voted to become part of Russia. Now, they could spin that any way they like in the media, but the fact remains that the people of Crimea overwhelmingly want to be part of Russia, and that there was no way that it was rigged. I don't think to that extent where that many people voted for the joining of Russia. And also remember that historically Crimea is part of Russia. Crimea has been a long time ally, well, not ally, but long time connected to Russia, be their ethnicities or, well, the people of Crimea, they're 65% ethnically Russian, which this new government in Ukraine wants to persecute Russians, so it's a problem. That is why Russia stepped in and intervened in Crimea, was to protect the ethnic Russians living in Crimea. The people of Russia also are definitely the large majority support Vladimir Putin, over 80% do, compared to the United States government, where we have, as the government in general, very low approval ratings. I mean, you have Congress has like an 89% disapproval rating in the United States, and the president, which is just merely a corporate spokesman, does not have any real power. And I think that a lot of times the cult of personality around a president is what gets the numbers. You have Trump has what, like 40% approval ratings. Obama had like 35 for a large part of his presidency. And you can imagine that a lot of that approval rating was based more on the cult of personality around that man rather than the actual policies and people approving of the policies that were supposedly passed by this president. So the actual support for the government as a whole in the United States is pretty low. And, you just see the amount of people are always very critical of most people, it seems like, are very critical of Congress and are very critical of the regulations that are being passed by the United States government. So we have over here, this government is so despised, but at the same time, they believe the media that speaks on behalf of the government on the lies about Russia. It's very interesting how it works, but that's the case. The people of the United States don't want to believe, I guess, maybe that the lies they've been told are fake. And they want to believe that despite this government that they know is corrupt, that this government they know is warmongering, they want to believe the lies told by that government through the media. And also that's other things that people like to believe that the illusion of the media being that there is a variety. There is no variety. They like to believe there's a variety in the media, but you'll look at there's 6 corporations that control over 15,000 media sources. So the media is controlled by pretty much just a few families, and they decide what content is aired on your television. They decide what goes on your radio, what goes on the newspapers, even though the newspaper is no longer really as effective source of media as it used to be. Just, one more source of media. And nowadays, I'd say the internet seems to be more the effective source of media. And you look at it, and people are still falling into, sharing stuff from websites like CNN or Fox, on the internet websites. And then a little bit further, the mainstream media sites that, claim to be a little bit off of, sometimes even the ones that claim to be alternative media push a lot of the mainstream narrative. For example, Breitbart in their pushing of the Islamophobic agenda, which is to use what the Zionist lobby wants in this country, which is to stir up fear towards Muslims, and not just the Zionist lobby, but the elites in general want the Muslims to be despised, be feared. That way they can push more tyrannical laws inside the United States, and that the warmongering against these countries won't be frowned upon. Against Syria, Iran, and the Zionist lobby has been very crucial towards pushing the war with Iran. And, you have people like Netanyahu who have been screaming about the idea that Iran might be getting close to having a nuclear weapon. So it's been debunked many times. And we can see it through history that Iran still doesn't have a nuclear weapon. And they try to tell us that if Iran's not stopped, that they'll nuke Israel or that they'll use weapons against the United States. Iran has been crucial towards fighting ISIS. However, they try to make it seem like Iran is a major sponsor of terror. Right now, you see Donald Trump seems to be pushing that idea that Iran is a terrorist foreign state that must be eliminated, which is similar to the when they told everyone that Saddam was supporting terrorism, which it is different because Iran is a democracy and has not done human rights violations compared to Saddam Hussein, who very much did. Saddam Hussein, there's no doubt that there was terrible things that were done by Saddam Hussein, but let me put one thing out there, that Saddam Hussein was supported by the United States government, and he was supported by the United States government for a few years through the Iraq-Iran war. In fact, part of the, well, actually, more than a few years, it was like close to a decade, the United States gave Saddam the green light to use chemical weapons against the Kurds. Now the United States can pretend to be the friends of the Kurds in Syria. Russia seems to be the ones that are actually protecting the Kurds, while the United States government still continues to do the same policy of giving weapons and supporting the terrorists. ISIS, an American-supported organization, is still wreaking havoc in the country, and the war continues in Syria. As we push into now, we're closing in on a 6th year of battle. Aleppo recently liberated, but still large parts of the country controlled by ISIS. And Syria being a major part in this new Cold War, as the Syrian government's pro-Russian, the rebels are pro-American, but these so-called rebels actually turn out to be terrorists that commit many human rights violations. There's evidence that they've used chemical weapons, and they target minorities. The Kurds, the Christians, they can all vouch for this fact, that these people are not moderates. These people are extremists. The Kurds and the Christians will tell you this, and that's why the Kurds and Christians are a lot of times supportive of the Assad regime. And the Christians overwhelmingly, they are supportive of the Assad regime. Kurds, there's been somewhat of division, but I think the West is trying to capitalize on differences in order to split apart Syria, while the Kurds in the Assad regime have been shown that they can work together, and they have worked together to defeat ISIS inside their countries. However, there's of course that dispute because the Kurds want their own country, Syrian Kurdistan. However, the Syrian government wants the country to remain united. However, there's been kind of a push-off for a while until this war is over about negotiations on territory. And this war seems to be far from over. There was the ceasefire that pretty much fell apart last February. And just continued fighting. In Palmyra, in Raqqa now, there's I think there's going to be a push towards it. And Raqqa is the self-proclaimed ISIS capital. ISIS, that's their capital of their fictional country. The ISIS says that they are, going to make their own, that their own country, and according to their own propaganda, is world domination is what they want. But not world domination. They want to take over the occupied lands, which are all these many Muslim countries and some European countries. I think it's just Spain. Right? They have in a lot of North Africa, but of course, these occupied countries, a lot of them are Muslim, and it raises up the question that ISIS seems to target Muslims more than they target Israel. And what other enemies you'd think would be enemies of a Islamic State, in quotations, Islamic State. The thing is that there's an agenda, and the agenda is to destabilize the Middle East. These people in ISIS, a lot of them are not even from the area, and they're mercenaries. And the amount of knowledge of Islam seems to be pretty low inside the group. And there are some fanatics that have been, out of pure ignorance, fight for the group. And, the whole center of ISIS comes from the ideology of Wahhabism that comes out of Saudi Arabia. These clerics brought out these asinine things about how they can spread the Islamic faith, from murder to acts of terror. These ISIS will be able to spread Islam. What these people are. That's what they use. They take the Wahhabist ideology into ISIS, and they think that ISIS will be able to spread Islam via that. The thing is how Saudi Arabia allows these Wahhabist clerics to even preach inside their country, and the Saudi regime is a extension of the Zionist mafia, the Zionist conspiracy, or the Zionist plan. And Saudi Arabia presents what it does is it kind of makes somewhat of a boogeyman to the West by having the Islamic extremism. It's the boogeyman to the West that they can justify many things. When I say they, the elites can justify. And also in the elites, the Zionists, but the elites can justify the actions that they're doing with a boogeyman, such as ISIS. Another thing that they can do, and also I should mention that I think that every elite is a Zionist, because the plan, Israel was created by the Rothschilds themselves, pretty much. Israel uses Saudi Arabia as well. Saudi Arabia is an ally. It's the Islamic version, I guess you could say, of Zionism. Because Zionism goes past Judaism. It goes past, I guess you could say your conventional supporters of it. Unfortunately, there's the Christian Zionist. There's even the Muslim Zionist. But Zionism, if you look at it this way, is not it's not something that is exclusively Jewish. Anyways, is that a lot of Jews reject Zionism because Zionism is not the same as Judaism. Judaism is or Zionism takes it's almost the equivalent of what Islamic extremism is to Islam, as Zionism is to Judaism. But here's another thing I should note out, is that another thing I should say is that Zionism is actually, the thing is, though, that seems unfortunate, is that a lot of American Jews and a lot of Western Jews have been sucked into it more than I think Western Muslims have been sucked into Islamic extremism. And I think partially because they've taken the name, or they've tried to take it. I don't think they have successfully taken it, but they've tried to take the name of Judaism, and they use it in order to recruit Jews into their ranks, but at the same time, to justify a lot of things they do. It's like a human shield. It's by putting the Jews in front of it. They a lot of times say that if you don't support Israel, you must be anti-Semitic. And then people, unfortunately, they start to think that all Jews must be Zionists, but it's not true. And Judaism and Zionism are also different from the fact that Zionism is based off the Talmud, which not all Jews follow. The Talmud is a book that expresses hate towards the Gentiles, and it's pretty much just a twisted version of supremacy for the Jews. And it's but of course it's like the equivalent of, you could say, is that not all German people supported Mein Kampf, or not all German not all German people actually believe they're superior and believes that all the stuff that was said in Mein Kampf or whatnot. It's the Zionism and Nazism are kind of the same thing in that regard, is that the ideology is kind of is based on either viewing the rest of the human race as inferior, or or as you being superior to the rest of the human race, as it being by blood Jewish. It doesn't even have to do by religion. As the founders of Zionism were atheists. That's what it's really about. It's by blood. And that's the thing that's weird, is that these atheists thought that God gave them the land. Just whenever someone tells you that we need to honor that because these people actually believe that land has been given to them by God, tell them that Thomas Herzl was an atheist. A lot of the founders of Zionism were atheists.
And also, another thing that deconstruct the whole myth of Zionism. That the I guess you could say the myth
of the modern Israeli state's right to exist is that they came in and stole the land. And a lot of these people from East Europe, these people don't really have a connection back to Palestine. And the people from Palestine, they have the connection back to Palestine. They have the connection to the biblical Jews, a lot of them, because a lot of the biblical Jews converted to Islam later. These people are the ones that have a right to that land, not these people that came from East Europe in the 1940s and whatnot. They stole the land. And, people say, it's like, well, you could be, are you criticizing Israel? Do you think that Israel has a right to exist? And I'll say, no, they do not have a right to exist. The state of Israel does not have a right to exist. And, people might misconstrue that to meaning people might think that I'm saying that the people of Israel have no right to exist. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the country, the state, and the entity of Israel has no right to exist because it's a fictional thing. And what it is theft. When one of the catchphrases on Facebook is taxation is theft. You could put another one that said Israel is theft. Of course, they'll probably that I don't know how long that would be allowed on Facebook. And Mark Zuckerberg is known to censor anti-Zionist pages on Facebook. And, I think though we've been very successful in recent years in order to even get out the awareness of what's going on in Israel. Because I don't think that I don't think that too many people knew a few years ago really anything about Israel. I think that a lot of people are starting to learn. But what is unfortunate is that still the people clinging on to that, we must support Israel no matter what mentality. Right? I see a lot of it. There's a split though, like in the Trump supporters. You see the split between Trump supporters, the ones that are pro-Israel and the ones that are anti-Israel. There's some of them that are anti-Israel, and it's also I say that's an unfortunate group as well that have been thoroughly duped by Trump into believing that he would potentially stand up to Israel, and the ones that are pro-Israel, which I think they're a much larger group than the ones that are anti-Israel. The pro-Israel Trump supporters that are just, they're on the mentality that Obama was some way anti-Israel and that they need a true pro-Israel president. But by the fact of most pro-Israel presidents, Obama was one of the most pro-Israel presidents by what he did. Kept giving more and more money to the Israelis. We have over $5 billion going over to the Israelis. The $5 billion, a little over $5 billion a year going to the Israelis. It's crazy. And at the same time, we have the massive problems with the infrastructure inside the United States. We also have massive problems, states going near bankrupt. We have this giant debt problem. And yet we're giving money to Israel in bunches in a country that appears to be thriving. And they're thriving off of theft. The Israelis took the Golan Heights. And you know what the Golan Heights is full of? Oil. That's Syrian land, but they stole it. Israel is a country that a lot of our grandparents are older than. There's people in Israel today that were born in Palestine, and some of them that were adults in Palestine. In fact, you could have been an adult in Palestine, and you'd be 88. So there's people that grew up and became adults in Palestine and saw Israel still land, and they're still alive today. And they try to make it seem like Israel's existence has been so long. And they, another thing is that they try to connect it to the biblical Israel, but there is no real connection between the biblical and modern Israel. Biblical Israel, people that of that land are now the Palestinians. Many of them are the Palestinians of today.
There's a huge difference between the Israelites and the Israelis, and there's a biblical passage who would like to refer to it. Was it Revelation 2:9, right? It says that these people that talks about the synagogue of Satan, these people that pose as the Israelites or the biblical Jews, but they would not be, and they would actually be pretty much as a den of evil. That would be the state of Israel, I would think. And the biblical Jews as well. They
The biblical Jews also probably were, there's a lot of evidence, but I imagine is that they're probably more darker than, of course, the ones that we see, these European Ashkenazis. But again, it goes along with the same, that these are the Palestinians of today. These Israelites, Israeli difference is pretty big. And these people, also these people that rely constantly on this giant military budget, and also the fact that they get a ton of weapons from the United States. They get all these F-16s from the United States. They get a shit ton of stuff from the United States, and the Israeli military uses this to go bomb whatever Syria, to go bomb the Palestinians or whatnot. These people do not, and I'm not saying that the Israeli people as a whole, but I'm saying the Israeli government, they do not act as any bit representative of anything connected to Jesus or the Bible. I think that the whole, it's very stark and clear the difference between these two entities, and anybody that actually is a bit of common sense could see that. A common sense and knows about the situation. And you have the common sense, you could see that this is not them. These are not the this is not a country to support, and the Christian Jews of this country have been duped by people like John Hagee, and there's been many. And a good example of a Christian Zionist, of course, would be Ted Cruz, or at least pretends to be. And I think the leaders, that's the question, whether these leaders are willfully ignorant or not willful, or they are deceitful or unwillful. They would actually be unwillfully ignorant or willfully, or they want to be deceitful. And I think that, I think that Ted Cruz, he falls into deceitful. Some of these, though, like Southern Baptist preachers that, promote the Zionist ideology, that's a question whether that might be out of just pure ignorance. I think Hagee, though, or is it Chuck Hagee, right? No, it's Chuck Hagel I'm thinking of. It's John Hagee. John Hagee is, I think, also is a knowing deceiver. Was that the right way of using that word? I don't know. The point is that Hagee, people like him, they're doing a massive disservice to the people in the United States. And also, we talk about there seems to be, usually there seems to be people don't like politics in their church, but it's like when they put Israel in, promoting Zionist politics, there doesn't seem to be a problem. But when a preacher starts talking about some other thing, like, I don't know, that maybe we shouldn't, like when a preacher talks about the opposite thing, maybe we should help out the Palestinians. There's a big controversy in the media or not, and there's been a few that have had the, they've had the integrity in order to do that, in order to support the Palestinians. And we've had, like, there was like that English guy that said that Israel had a connection with 9/11, which Israel did have a connection with 9/11. Come on, man. The Mossad vans were going down New York City on 9/11. People are going to tell you that they're going to tell you that, oh yeah, those white Mossad vans, they don't mean anything. Just coincidence. Just ignore that or whatever. Oh yeah, there's no such thing as the mural van. Literally, a van was a painting of the what appears to be two towers being hit by a plane. I don't know. That just seems like a fucking coincidence. It's so obvious to, I guess, at a certain point when you see also you see Israel and their role inside the United States is parasitic to the American people. In the United States government, it's a mutual collaboration, but and I say mutual, but I think Israel's ultimately a little bit higher level. You know, this is my stance: is that there seems to be different points of views inside the alternative media. There's some people that take the stance more like Israel's bad, but they're just a satellite of the United States. I think it's a very wrong view to have that, because then you can't really acknowledge the amount of role of influence they have in this country and influencing our politics, and also influencing our law enforcement. You know, they train a lot of our cops. It's also, then there's the people that say they're about equal, and I say that's a little bit more close to that's more close to the truth, a lot more close to the truth. And you can realize that they have a lot of influence in the world, despite being a tiny country geographically. Is that they have a lot of influence with what's going on in the Middle East and all around the world. And then I would say there's like my stance is that they got a little bit more say than the United States government, and that is that the Zionists, they ultimately are controlled by the big bankers in the end. But there seems that they have a little bit more influence on pushing the tensions around the world. You know, they seem to, for example, doing the false flags that cause wars to start. Mossad's been notorious for false flags. They've been notorious for assassinations. Mossad's been largely responsible for assassinations they have been responsible for assassinations against nuclear scientists in Iran. As they seem to be pushing the United States-Iran war, Israel will still say how they're a peaceful country that's being attacked by rockets. And let's remember what they're doing to the Palestinians is that they continue, even when there's no actual war going on. They're still bombing the Palestinians. And there was no actual war going on in 2014. That was a massacre, Operation Protective Edge. That bombings that they did that killed 2,000 people, that was a massacre. Because the Palestinians have no standing army. The Palestinian people have no really effective way of resistance against the Israelis. It's sickening.
So to see how far deluded some people are into the lies of the Zionists
on social media. It's because you know how hard they do that to brainwash these people. And they unfortunately they take people that might have been well-meaning, and they are well-meaning people, and want to fight for what's right, but they've been told so many times that standing up for Israel is what's right. They take normal Americans and turn them and get them to support their ideology of hate. And, the Zionists also have other ways of stirring up hate, and I think that the Zionists have been largely responsible for, not largely responsible, but I think they have a hand in the support of the white supremacist movement inside the United States, because it's two the same, Zionism and the white supremacist movement, because what it does is stir up division, and they use that with their divide and conquer strategy. Nazism and Zionism worked together in the past, and you see it working together in modern times in Ukraine. The second biggest ally of West Ukraine is Israel. And there's the United States government is their biggest ally. And West Ukraine is being used as a piece towards stirring up a war with Russia. It's said that even West Ukraine might even receive Israeli weapons. I know they get Israeli money. The United States government, of course, sends them a shit ton of money. And you see the United States duplicity right there is to pushing tension in Eastern Europe. Right now, they've put tons of troops in these Eastern European countries, and they have all this tension being built up towards Russia. And, there was like an incident recently, was like, what, a fire jet or something got shot down by Russia? No, it wasn't right by here. It was right by their own fucking waters. And they got this incident happened. They try to make it seem like it happened way over here and that this is the Russians' provocation. The United States does many, many provocations. And when somebody calls them on one of their provocations, then all of a sudden there's a massive problem. What I say it would be extremely controversial to the United States. I think to a lot of the world, it's common sense. The mainstream media, it seems that even if you say 30% of what I'm saying on the air, you won't be allowed back. You have CNN in your mainstream media. You have somebody talk about how CNN gives money to Bahrain. She was booted off there, fired. I know that was her own network, and that's probably people say, well, that would happen to me on any network. Which I don't think is the case, but I think but that little criticism of the government of Bahrain was part of it. And, really what seems to be an insignificant piece of the United States strategy, which that's a pretty significant piece. But you make one statement wrong, and you're gone. The mainstream media has used their news readers in order to push lies into the American people. And it's a complete change of mindset. It's programming. It's programming the people in towards hating certain people while loving their oppressors. And I would say it's not programming in the sense of like what you see in the science fiction films. I would say programming might not the term that they would use, but they might say voluntary re-education. I don't know. That seems something almost like something the United States government would use in order for these programs. But it also, let's give the actual name of the operation that they used in order to change the people's minds. Operation Mockingbird, which was to control the media. And, the CIA has made an effort in order to turn fake information to real information to the minds of the American people. They have an alternative reality. And, you could say that the Americans are living behind a steel curtain, much like how people said that the Russians were living during the time of the Soviet Union, that they were living behind a steel curtain, or behind a steel curtain. But the steel curtain fell many years ago, and they try to make it seem like the Russians are living behind the steel curtain. But the Americans, unfortunately, so helplessly lost in a sea of propaganda, are now screaming about how Russia wants to change our very ways of life, and how they want to attack our allies, and how that Russia seems for just the point of hate towards Western civilization or Western way of life. They want to start war with us. It seems to be the kind of mindset the Americans are falling into. But the reality is Russia does not want to start war with us. They know what a real war is like. World War II, they lost some estimates, 45 million people. They don't want to start war with us. They don't want to see that ugly aftermath. They don't want to start war with us. They want peace. People want peace as the government wants peace. And you see how they diffused the situation in Syria almost 4 years ago. If they really wanted war with us, they could have let that blow up. Or they could have let Ukraine, they could have just went into Ukraine and took that over. They could have easily took it over and seen what happened after that. But they've shown so much restraint because they do not want war with us. The Russian government is showing restraint. Putin is really showing the calm, collective nature of, I guess you could say a chess player or something. It's like a big chess game. Is how his strategy's been. And slowly outsmarting, outwitting this very carefully selected and nefarious plan by the elites he's been able to get small victories here and there. And I say Aleppo is just one of those small victories. Another small victory, you could say, was was what happened. I guess you could say a small victory would be the Crimea situation, where he was able to at least help out in a small part the people of East Ukraine and Crimea. So, well, it's separate, I guess. But East Ukraine, separate from East Ukraine. But it's still in the people affected in Ukraine, he was able to help some of the people. Putin has been able to get these small victories here and there. And, the CIA seems to be very pissed at Putin. A lot of the Western governments seem to be very pissed at Putin. And partially it's because he's successful. He's successful at going against the New World Order plan. The New World Order plan that does not have nations in it. It has one source of power, one country. And a country without borders, and within this borderless entity, a totalitarian fascist state that they plan to impose on the entire planet, where the super rich have total control. That's the reality. People thought the New World Order was a conspiracy for many years, and now it seems to be a lot more of those people that said it was a conspiracy are starting to eat their words. And the countries that oppose the New World Order, some of them have been knocked off, but there's been small victories here and there. And I would say that the turning of the tide in Syria is part of it. Also, Iran is still not one of them, as they haven't been able to knock off Iran yet. And the war with Iran may have been delayed somewhat by the awakening of the American people. Though, in total honesty, I don't think that's what it is. I think they just delayed it, or not delayed it. It's that they were just waiting for a man like Trump to initiate it. They were waiting for this administration, and Trump seems to be a perfect candidate for unleashing a war with Iran, because the amount of enthusiasm with Trump, I think that he could definitely lead a country into war. Both candidates were perfect candidates for a war president, but why did they pick Trump in the end? It's still an interesting question. I think partially it was they realized that people were so sick of the establishment, let's have someone that seems to be kind of anti-establishment in order to quell some of that sentiments. Though quickly people are realizing that Trump is probably one more person of the establishment. When he's putting pressure on Venezuela, putting pressure on Iran, talking tough on, talking about sending the ground troops to Syria. Another thing is that he's already talking about that Crimea needs to be given back, and there was never really a clear indication that Trump was pro-Putin or was pro-Putin. Trump, I might have said some nice words about Putin, but what he said he was going to do wasn't really that of somebody to be totally pro-Russian. And also this whole myth that Russia hacked the election in order to get Trump in. If Russia actually hacked the election, don't you think they would pick somebody like Ron Paul that doesn't support war against any of their allies, nor supports this provocation through their own country? I know Ron Paul wasn't in the race, but I'm saying they would find somebody like Ron Paul. They would find a way to get Ron Paul to win the election. They can't hack the election. They don't have the ability to do it, and they didn't. Why would they hack a rigged election? The winner of the election is not picked by the people, the booths. It was picked by the people, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers that ultimately control the United States. That's the harsh reality. Putin, I think he's handled some of the stress that's been put on this country very well, to be honest, because I think that with all these sanctions and whatnot, is that their economy doesn't seem to be doing as bad as you would think. And, there was talk a while back that their economy was starting to flounder. That was like a little over 2 years ago. And that their economy was nearing some kind of crash or whatnot. And then that kind of tapered off. And now it seems to be a lot of the American allies' economies are suffering. And you have the sputtering economy of Colombia. You have the problems over there in Canada. You have problems with the Ukrainian economy. I think there's problems with the Turkish economy. You got problems with the economies of many American allies. There's another big Mexico's economy. And, that seems to be made potentially some kind of early indicator that made of a dollar collapse, that the entire dollar world is starting to feel the pressure, and there's an inevitable dollar collapse that's coming soon. The ruble seems to be, I would think, is a smart bet right now, because the ruble really can only, I would think, would really only could go, well, it could go down, but I think there's a very high chance it could go up from here. You know what I'm saying? The ruble is a most likely expanding currency. And gold, of course, is always a safe bet. But the dollar, out of all currencies, I think that the ruble, with the predictions by the economists, is going to be the smartest currency. And I think that a lot of countries are going to be using it in the future. For trade in different commodities or whatnot. But it really can just go up from here. There's a chance it could go down, but it's going to go up. The people of the United States are really I'm thinking what's going to happen once the dollar collapse happens, because these people will fight over when the last TV is at a Black Friday sale. Imagine how these people are going to react when there's when the food runs out or whatnot, and there's basic supplies that all of a sudden become scarce. It's very likely that we're going to see a very scarce scenario if that was to happen. And also, I think Trump is the martial law president. I mean, we have this guy that seems to have this callous mentality towards the use of troops on American streets. We have this man that's talking about potentially using 100,000 troops, right, in order to round up immigrants. Which, what's unfortunate is people that just a few months ago were talking about how the New World Order runs the United States government are not cheering on Trump, and they think that his roundup of immigrants using troops is a smart idea. What it is a gateway to troops being used for other uses, and people say, well, it's actually illegal immigrants. And yes, it's true that it's illegal immigrants. And we also have to remember that illegal immigration is just a tool for big corporations to get cheaper labor. Illegal immigration is not something that people like to blame the illegal immigrants themselves. It's ultimately major corporations that I think have pushed the United States government to keep lenient rules on immigration. For example, the fact that why do we have such they have a lenient defense against immigration. We don't have a serious border security team, and the wall is just it's another phony solution. It's not going to do anything. It's going to be $30 billion. People say that it's well worth the investment or whatnot, but it's not going to do anything because the wall, there's tunnels. I mean, unless you're going to build this thing out of steel or something like that, it ain't going to do much. These people could scale it. These people also, there's oceans around it. Another thing to remember is that a lot of immigrants come by planes, illegal immigrants. They come by plane. Is what I'm saying is the immigrants. People seem to also put a wider net on immigrants in general. They don't see a problem. What I do see a problem is when there is a taking over of the old culture of a country by a new culture of the country, and that's different. When cultures start to become lost via mass immigration or whatnot, and
that seems to be a problem inside the United States.
it's not coming from the immigration. That is what I'm saying. That the loss of culture is not coming from the immigration. It's coming from the media and whatnot. That's why we're losing our traditional American culture, being replaced by the corporate bullshit culture that's now America, 2017 America. That's we don't have our and then people say, well, what American culture? But it was obviously the American culture, and it was that I think partially that we were farmers and we were hardworking people that and I would say we're more wholesome and more seeking to help out the neighbor. Now it seems that to be suspicious of the neighbor, to be or to try to be better than the neighbor, and that shouldn't be the mentality, to try to be better than the neighbor. You want to help out the neighbor. We used to have more of a mutual struggle approach, that we're all in this together and we should help each other out to achieve common goals. Now it seems to be everyone's concerned about themselves and trying to outdo everyone else. In many ways, people will say that that nowadays people have more of socialist mentalities than ever. We had, I think, more of a socialist mentality then, and in our the old agrarian American landscape and the old United States than we do now. It's not a bad thing to have the socialist, I think, mutual effort mentality. Of course, there's a difference between Stalinism and socialism. Like, people like to equate socialism and Stalinism together. The whole, and people also say that
the competitive nature is what drives innovation or whatnot. But isolationist and non-cooperation is not what drives innovation. It's still innovation. You still need cooperation. You still need, that was the thing, is the communities would find ways to confront different struggles and get through them. It's much harder, to get through stuff. You got to have one person thinking rather than having 30 or 50 people. When a little town would get together in order to figure out how to deal with the drought or whatnot.
They would find a way. More likely than not. It's definitely changed the mentality of the American people. That's one thing that they did, is that they partially they've divided us. They've divided. People were saying that Trump's dividing people, or is going to divide us. But Trump is already is taking on a very divided nation. He's just going to divide them further. That's his goal. As the corporate spokesman of America, that's part of his agenda, is to divide the American people further, divide the people of the United States into even smaller groups with more tension. It seems they divided us by race, they divided us by color, they divided us by many different ways. And what's next? And then they try to divide up the activist community with identity politics by saying that, oh, he's more oppressed than you. He's a white male. It's like he can't sympathize with you or whatnot. But that's the one thing, is to look past each other as white, black, or whatnot, and look at each other as activists.
And that's not to say that I can't acknowledge that blacks, Hispanics have been treated certain way, a bad way by the system, in relative to maybe whites or other races of the country. They're acknowledging systematic racism, but at the same time, not feeding into the identity politics of dividing us.
Division is their agenda, because it's much easier to conquer a divided people than it is a united people. A united working class. They're united, the super rich, the billionaires, they're united in order to find more ways to take even more power away from the working class and to obtain more power. But we don't seem to be united, us, the working class. They have successfully divided a lot of people. But there's still a possibility to unite the activist community, unite the working class against people and their nefarious conspiracy. And another thing, one of the main things we can do is stop believing the media. Stop believing these news readers, these corporate spokesmen. And you have your different ones from, all these journalists, or so-called journalists, and people believe them just partially because they have that name. And it's like, oh, well, Anderson Cooper said this. Well, is Anderson Cooper, the man that literally has ties to the CIA, is one more of a media source that was founded by a billionaire and has been caught one time the fake newscast. Seeing that is horrible, and it's such an obvious example of how fake the news is. And the MSNBC, Fox News, and the mainstream media. There's the way to get the real media, which is going into the alternative media, going to RT and going to Press TV are good sources, despite what people say about them. I think they're very good for starters, but of course don't rely everything on what they say. Always go to your other sources. There are many other sources you can find on there. You don't find on the internet. Anti-media, and there's Min Press News. Those are just some of the top names right there. We're at almost the top of the hour. Just letting you know that the phone lines are open. 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296 here at Voice of Rebellion Radio. I am your host, Chris J, here on Sunday night. Talked about this new Cold War. And there's also now the McCarthyist myth of that Russia is communist has kind of resurfaced. Before it was true, now it's a myth. And people actually believe that Russia's a communist country and Russia's dangerous to democracy in the West or whatnot. People think Russia is just dangerous in general. And, this whole idea that there's all these people working for Russia inside the United States government goes back to, the McCarthyist days where everyone was suspected of working for Russia, or then that the communists had all these sleeper agents or whatnot inside the United States. And, McCarthy had people convinced that this was that there was a massive conspiracy by Russia in order to subvert our democracy, which the Soviet Union definitely played dirty. The Russian government seem to kill with kindness. Really, that seems to be more of their strategy. It's like what happened with the embassy in this incident, that they ultimately ended up showing a massive act of kindness and pretty much won the situation over. They were the bigger man. And the KGB, they try to make it seem like that Russia's still committing the acts of what the KGB did. And, people don't, quickly refute what they say that Russia's doing with their own intelligence by saying, look what the CIA does. The CIA has been involved with so many coups, has been involved with so many assassinations. What about the fact of the CIA and their involvement with the JFK assassination? You had George H.W. Bush was right there when he was in the CIA. He was in Dallas that day. I know you could say that he was protecting the president, but still, I think there was an involvement between H.W. Bush and the JFK assassination. May not the primary involvement. I don't think he was the primary involvement, but one of the top people involved, or one of the people involved. I think that ultimately it came down to the Federal Reserve, ultimately the ones that had JFK assassinated, and you also have Israel was involved by the fact that he was going to send monitors to the Dimona nuclear plant, and the fact that JFK wasn't that pro-Israel. But also, whenever somebody says that Iran's building nuclear weapons illegally, especially when they're pro-Israel and they say that, when they're pro-Israel and they say that Iran's obtaining illegal nuclear weapons, remember that Israel, tell them that Israel had got their nuclear weapons illegally. Tell them that Israel got their illegal nuclear weapons illegally. And the construction of the nuclear weapons actually started in 1958, and they were going active around the time around the early to mid 60s. That's when JFK was going to put a halt to it. He could have stopped it. JFK could have stopped the nuclear weapons being attained by Israel. He was trying to stop nuclear Israel, and he didn't succeed. There was actually an incident in 1973 where a stray Libyan airliner was approaching the airspace above the Dimona nuclear plant, and Israeli fighters shot it down after failure to make it follow them, killing 108 people. So, again, going back to our supposed ally Israel and what they've been involved in over the years, is that they seem to be a lot of the things that they claim Iran and Syria seem to be, or that they claim Iran and Syria are. Israel are the most, some of the biggest hypocrites, in the world. I would say that the Israeli government are some of the biggest hypocrites in the world. They push so many lies, so many myths about the world and their twisted worldview that they have. It's very warped, and in that worldview is that everyone hates them, and everyone hates them for no reason. And the reason of the hatred towards these Israeli government's obvious, because they're bombing people. They're bombing the Palestinians. And they're thieves. They stole the land from the Palestinians. And they claim that that's their land. They claim that it's always been their land. When they weren't there for thousands of years. Well, hundreds of years. And then they come back in 1947, or in quotations come back. It's not the same people. It's like Nasser said, there's a problem because the Jews, they left Israel black and they came back to Israel as white. That's a great way to describe it. They left Israel as the Palestinians, how the Palestinians look, and which is pretty dark. They left us how the Palestinians look, and they came back looking like Europeans because they were Europeans. And just remember the Mossad motto: "By way of deception, thou shalt make war." At least that's a motto inside of their group or something like that. I don't know if that's their public motto. I don't think that is not their public motto. I think it's I think it's like some kind of thing that they say inside the group. Mossad's a Mossad is a real terror group, and you hear all the time about Al Qaeda, ISIS. Just remember, these are shells of the ultimate supporter of terrorism around the world, which is the Israeli government. There is no Islamic terrorism as we know it without the Israeli government and the United States government and the elites in general, Rothschild, Rockefellers, whatnot. These different elite families that ultimately control a lot of the
Please leave your message for 72764877744.
America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, Puerto Little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my shop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose of it, close out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit, bitch, if not, better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at you, I own every gold mine in South Africa, thanks baby, you made me $1 billion, plus I own a building, for each one of my children.
We are live here with your host, Chris J., and today's topic is an interesting one. It's about, two of the most heralded events in world history, with a lot of conspiracy all around these events, is the two world wars. I put a couple of videos up there in the event page on Facebook, and it was pretty interesting, just the one about the World War I, how, they tell you that in 1915, the Germans, sent a submarine to go torpedo a bunch of innocent men, women, and children on a boat going to Britain from the United States. But there's a lot of things they'll tell you about that, is that the Louisiana was actually not really a passenger boat. It was actually a arms boat sending tons of munitions, and it wasn't just pistols like the United States say, because there was reports of 2 explosions on even the eyewitnesses and the logs that sank both say, the people who survived and the logs both say what I'm saying is true, is that there were bombs of some kind, munitions, that were on their way to Britain on Louisiana, which exploded on impact after the torpedo. There was 2 explosions, the torpedo and then the munitions blew up, causing the boat to sink in just 18 minutes, which is a remarkably fast time. A few survivors do say this, and you can go look this up. This was actually, if you think this is just some random YouTuber, this was not. This is actually a college professor who said this. I couldn't tell you exactly from what college, but this is it was very interesting about this. It's actually a 3-minute video, only 800 views, sadly, but there's when it also comes to that, the video went on further to say that at this time, Winston Churchill was actually already in power in Britain. He just wasn't the president or the prime minister of Britain. He was at the time, I think he was somewhere in the Navy. He was a commander in the Navy or something like that. And so pretty much he and a few other people in Britain had conducted pretty much a study to see what would be the emotional and psychological effect on the British people and the American people. I think it was mostly for the Americans, actually, because they hadn't joined the war. Britain had already joined the war, I believe. They were in it since the beginning. But it was to decide, it was how would this affect the people? It was decide, if they should do this to push the war and, onto the American people, and they did. So the study was pretty much, it's just coincidental 3 weeks before that they were doing a study about what sinking of a boat like this would do on the psyche of the American people. And guess what? That happened 3 weeks later, and that very event, killed 1,200 people on that boat. But there was multiple warnings. The Germans had foiled this plot before. The Germans were actually, had warned the Americans that if they sailed the boat, if they sent the boat out there, it would have to be they would have to torpedo it. There was no choice considering there was arms on the boat going straight to Britain. Now, I kind of do disagree that I think the Germans should have led it for the sake of, the humanity of 1,200 people. But the Americans were at fault of this event. It was similar to, it's almost a similar effect of the Pearl Harbor almost. That they have their equal blame should be put at them for starting the war. Now, there's two different stories. Axis powers of World War II were all controlled by big corporate banking interests, especially Germany, who had connections to the Ford family, all kinds of big interests, the Fords, the Bushes. And so that's a different story than World War I. World War I, at the time, the German monarchy was one of the most advanced countries humanitarianly, technologically, and even militarily in the whole world. They posed a real threat to the banking strongholds of Britain, France, Italy, and Russia to the east. It was practically all walled in, such a giant German empire in the center, who were against the bankers. They were against the whole bankers' plot, and they were different in many ways, and they were humanitarianly advanced in the way that they were before any other country on the planet had this concept even made. They had free health care, turned health care from a private service to a human right, which it should be considered. And then the big one is how they treated people from different countries and foreign, overseas. They treated countries outside Germany not like how the French and the British colonial powers. When you look at the Entente powers of World War I, which were the countries the United States supported, they were all practically colonial, racist, imperialist powers. So that's the only way I can describe them. With especially Britain and France, who had all throughout Africa, they had control. In Italy, I believe, controlled Libya. If you actually look at a map of 1912 of Africa, most of Africa is controlled by these racist Entente powers. That's the best way to describe it. Really, also, all they did was take resources and treated the people like slaves. A lot of these countries did have slavery. Maybe not at that exact time, but in the past they had slavery. All these countries, and so you had all these countries, that were colonial, imperialistic powers that were on the United States side, to smash the one country that was not exactly the same as that. Germany was not colonial power. In fact, they actually supported sovereign African countries, almost to the way how Russia supports sovereign countries in the Middle East today, is what Germany did to sovereign African countries back then. There was a country, Darfur, and I can't think of they had different names. There weren't that big of countries, but they supported the sovereign ones, not countries that they had under colonial power like Britain did. Britain at one point controlled a quarter of the world. Not this time, I don't think, but they controlled a big part of the world at this time, including a lot of African countries. Same thing with France, a big giant. I think Mali was French at this time, and there was even countries like Belgium. I think even had countries down, which I think Belgium took the Entente. Yeah, they took the Entente side too. Look, even them took the Entente. In fact, there's only, I believe, 3 countries. I believe that the 3 major powers around the axe are, I think, the Central they call them. There was 3 major countries, and that was there was Austria, Hungary, Germany, and Ottomans. Now, the Ottomans, I'm not going to say were good people. I mean, the Ottomans did commit the Armenian genocide not that long before. It was a little bit back in the 1880s. It was after a gun ban, which, surprise, surprise, it always happened. Always gun bans cause genocides, but in most cases, gun bans cause genocide, and that's what happened when the Ottomans did to the Armenians and killed 1 million plus Christians there. So they weren't saying to you, the Ottomans. so I'm not going to defend them. And the Ottomans had controlled many countries for a long period of time, and it was finally time for their empire to fall apart. But Germany wasn't that too shabby of a country, and what they were, in a way, were against was that colonial racism that you saw in Africa. That you saw in Africa being committed by Britain, France, and many of these countries, and you had to use this false pretext called the Louisiana, which they teach was just a passenger boat with just a few guns on it, like little handguns and stuff. No, these were actually bombs and that kind of deal. They were getting ready to send bombs to. They're ready to send bombs to Britain, who were already in the war. Now, how the war actually started was that the first shot fired was by the Entente supported Gavrilo Princip, who shot Franz Ferdinand, and people say that the Central Powers had overreacted to the war, that they had their feelings hurt, so that's the deal. It was more than that. It was that the Entente was stepping on these, the smaller Central Powers that weren't nearly as big as the Entente powers, which encompassed all of West Europe practically. The Central were literally in Central Europe. I think that's how they got the names of Central Powers. And then to the East Europe was all Russian, which was at the time under the Tsar, was part of the Entente too. This is what I don't get about people who say that Russia was not part of this bankers' plot. They were working actively with the Entente powers to destroy Germany, one of the last strongholds not controlled. One of the last countries not controlled by the bankers at this time. It was a big area. Now, Gavrilo Princip, I believe, had some connections to some other. Let's say there it is, Gavrilo Princip. Now, I'm just going to put this out here. Now, there's a few connections, but there's a lot of people think that there's some kind of Masonic plot, which is possible, but also Gavrilo Princip, who, pretty much did step on the Central Powers' ground and was pretty much now trying to break up the Austro-Hungarians, which later led to the division of that. And of course, let's say that Gavrilo Princip, that was just in 1914. I think it was June 28, 1914, when it's only been 100 years when he shot Franz Ferdinand. But let's see that we're going to go ahead with more of this. But here it is. Gavrilo Princip was connected to a secret organization in Serbia called the Black Hand. See, I think it was more than the Masonic. It was also the secret society, and it was a conspiracy led by people of the people on these colonial powers, the Entente powers. Gavrilo Princip was just practically a pawn to shoot this guy, Franz Ferdinand, and then make the Central Powers have even less of a chance of winning. The Central Powers actually did have a really good chance of winning. The Central Powers had a good chance of winning World War I, especially when Russia dropped out from the Entente. They could have won, but then the United States quickly jumped in, using that Louisiana as the defense. So literally that pushed the whole tide in order to reset the stage of Europe, because after this, Europe has a whole different. Europe turns into a whole different place. Europe after this is a divided. They have the United States pawns practically of Britain. Churchill would eventually get the power. France is pretty much gets divided up between two sides of the same coin, really. Because Vichy is controlled by France. He supports the German Nazis, the National Socialists in Germany. which, by the way, I must point out doesn't have anything to do with socialism. It has everything to do with fascism. But, it gets divided up by those people controlled by banking interests, Ford, Bush, J.P. Morgan. And then on the other side of the coin, is the United States-led powers, controlled by Federal Reserve, controlled the United States. So two sides of corporate powers are now Europe's divided into. Now the deal is that pretty much they're going to set the stage to start another world war. It's not like how some people make this a conspiracy sound like, oh, they just agreed to go to war, Stalin and Hitler. No, it's more like Stalin. It's more like Hitler had a plot, was very much told by his superiors, and so was Stalin, to do this and this and this, and they made a war happen. Why did they make the war happen? Or they told Hitler to do all these actions for a reason, is to make a war happen between Russia and Germany in order to pretty much make that one world government with another stage towards it. Because then they made one of their major hatchet organizations, the United Nations, out of it. The United Nations was made out of World War II, and it pretty much was taking power out of the ashes. It's almost like that symbol you see on the back of the dollar, the phoenix rising out of the ashes. Is pretty much the New World Order, taking power out of chaos. That's practically their motto. They cause the chaos to happen, and then in the ruins they pretty much take power. And it's easy to take power over weakened people, especially over a continent that has been weakened by two wars, like World War I and World War II happened. And they destroyed, their last resistance in Europe at the time. At least for a while, the German Empire. Now, I think later, there's documents that say more go on the deal, saying that Khrushchev was kind of like the one person that was supposed to be killed but wasn't killed, and then he took a halt to the whole NWO agenda, because I think if the NWO agenda was going at the same speed it was going in the 50s, then the whole world would have been under practically one government by now almost. And then of course Kennedy was not supposed to be in their plans either, and at one time we were almost at the point of being liberated from these bankers and these NWO type people, war profiteers, but they made an end to Kennedy and leaving. Then they
point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse, like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now, then